Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for The Apple, which is episode 5 of season 2 of Star Trek The Original Series. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek as requested by my viewers. This episode was requested by William Mast. So, The Apple is the episode where Kirk, Spock, McCoy, Chekhov, a hot yeoman, and a bunch of doomed red shirts beam down to a planet that appears to be a paradise. It appears that way until the plant life and lightning storms start picking off the red shirts one by one. This problem gets worse when they find there's an energy source that's affecting the Enterprise in orbit that's preventing the landing party from beaming back up and draining the power from the ship and dragging it towards the planet where, without power, it will be destroyed in the atmosphere. Kirk and crew soon discover a group of primitive tribal people who all look like a bunch of sunburnt Californians from the 60s that don't know what children are or what love is. These tribal people apparently worship a being called Val, who supplies them with all their food and needs. Kirk and crew soon learn that Val is a complex machine that is responsible for trying to destroy the Enterprise and is trying to kill the landing party. Part of the duties of the village people is to feed Val, which replenishes its power supplies. So Kirk orders the landing party to hold the villagers hostage, preventing them from feeding Val, and then he orders the Enterprise to launch a full attack on it, which weakens its power, having to fend off the attack, and eventually allows the Enterprise to destroy it, thus bringing them all out of danger, and then the villagers are now free to be self-sufficient and to start making babies. So, the first YouTube video I've ever done was a top 10 episodes of the original series, which I did about 5 years ago. It was a really bad quality back then, and I was calling my channel at the time Senator Vreenek's Star Trek Reviews. In that video, I named The Apple as one of the 5 worst episodes of the original series, which I believe is why William Mast wanted to hear my thoughts on this episode in more detail. Well, I made that video about 5 years ago, so the question is, do I still consider this episode one of the 5 worst episodes of Star Trek the Original Series? In retrospect, I think I'm going to have to go with no and say there are actually worse episodes from the original series. And if I were to do a 5 worst list again, this one probably wouldn't make it this time around. That being said, I still don't think this episode is very good, and indeed is quite bad. The first thing I mentioned in that video before is that this is the ultimate red shirt episode. In fact, I think it takes the whole red shirt concept to an absurd extreme. First, a dude dies from a flower spitting shit on him, then another dude gets killed by lightning striking him, then another dude trips over an explosive rock, and then finally the last guy gets hit in the back by villagers. That last one by far is the most ridiculous death of them all, as I didn't even think he was dead at first, because all that happened was some sunburnt surfer dude hitting him with the back with a stick. I mean, that would hurt a lot and potentially cause some serious damage to your back, but the dude didn't even hit him that hard, and what kind of bizarre world does a hit like that kill someone? I mean, all they had to do is change it to a hit on the head rather than on the back, and that would have been far more believable. Head injury. Yeah, I get that, but this makes no sense. But then again, this is the original series where Kirk can knock someone out by just giving them a quick karate chop to the shoulder. Anyway, 4 red shirts, and they were all wearing red shirts, and they all died one at a time. I'm sorry, but that's really boring. Also, I understand it's been nearly 50 years since this aired, so you have to make some allowances for the quality based on its age and the time period it was released in. But even so, this episode didn't age well at all. I mean, episodes like Sitting on the Edge of Forever, Mirror Mirror, and Balance of Terror, it doesn't matter how old these episodes get, they're timeless. This episode, however, is extremely dated. While I was watching this episode, I kept thinking about this stand-up comedian bit. I think it was from Kevin Pollak, but I don't remember. It could have been someone else. Anyway, this comic was talking about the original series and how Kirk and crew would beam down to a planet where people had paper plates stapled to their heads, and Kirk would go, "Why do you have paper plates stapled to your head?" And I kept thinking about this the whole entire episode when these sunburnt Californians had these cheesy looking antennas glued onto their necks. It was just looked so dumb. But getting beyond the aesthetics, which is too easy to pick on in the original series, the plot itself was just really a boring rehash of episodes that they did better before, like Return of the Archons, which was also about a supercomputer that controlled a whole society that Kirk and crew had to destroy in order to save that world. But that episode was a lot more complex and interesting, as it introduced concepts like festival, where everyone would just beat the shit out of each other once a day, and then they would go back to being placid, boring Mormons. And they gave the supercomputer an interesting background and history, where here they didn't even bother to try to come up with any explanation on where these paper mache alligator looking thingy existed and why it was controlling people. No clue to their origins or why it was doing this or why it was trying to destroy the Enterprise. It was just no explanation was given, and I'm sorry, that's just lazy writing. And then they try to cram down our throats some obvious metaphors about the Garden of Eden and eating from the tree of knowledge or whatever, and I'm sorry, those just didn't work at all. However, at the end of the episode, Spock was wondering if they did the right thing by destroying Val, and I think that's actually a very good point, because you had these villagers who were incapable of doing anything for themselves, and all of a sudden Kirk destroys the one thing taking care of them, and then he just takes off and it's like, "So long, suckers," and thinks that they'll be just fine on their own, whereas before they couldn't even feed themselves. What the fuck is Kirk thinking? What he should have done is, taken them back to Earth, dropped them off in California, and be like, "Here's some surfboards and some sunscreen, go have fun." But no, we're meant to think they're going to be A-okay because they're going to learn how to fuck now, and that's what's important in life. Not being able to feed themselves, but being able to screw. Okay, so now let me talk about Chekhov, because this was shortly after he was introduced at the start of Season 2, and at this stage they were going to make him some sort of teenage heartthrob, which is why he spent the whole episode hitting on a hot human, and surprisingly, he got some success. However, shortly after this, they gave up on this whole idea, so this is the only episode where Chekhov seems successful with the ladies. For the rest of the series, they gave that privilege to Kirk. But it's funny, in this episode, Kirk tells Chekhov off for his hormones and is like, "Oh, now's not the time to be making out." And I'm just thinking to myself, "Oh, shut up, Kirk. You're just jealous because you're not the one making out with the hot chick." So my rating for the Apple out of 10 is a 2, extremely poor. It's not quite as bad as I remember. I've certainly seen worse in the original series, but there's very little redeeming qualities in this episode, as it just overdoes it with the red shirt cliche, the cheesy Chekhov romance scenes, and cringe-worthy basic plot line of a supercomputer running a society that's been done so many other times in the original series, and usually much better. It makes this episode pretty unremarkable. So that's it for my review of the Apple. If there's an episode from any of the 5 Star Trek series that you would like me to review, just leave a comment below with the episode you'd like me to review, and I'll endeavor to do so. And Enchantment of Eternity is now on Facebook, so be sure to check out my Facebook page, give it a like. I'll put the link in the description below, and make sure you subscribe so you can keep up with all that. And thanks a lot for watching.